The long-lost human spaceship lay dead in space, its crew gone and its secrets ripe for the taking. Aboard the Adocian battleship EDS Zephyr, Commander Knox rubbed his scaly hands together eagerly. His crew of 50 had stumbled upon the greatest find in years. The massive reptilian stood tall in gleaming armor, barking orders as his crew scrambled into action. Among the specialists were Zar, a brilliant tech, and Kaz, a brutal fighter. They approached the drifting wreck, establishing connections and prepping boarding tubes. Little did they suspect that deep within the derelict Odyssey, a threat stirred. The last human aboard, Captain Frank Williams, watched them from the shadows on grainy security feeds. His finger hovered over a button, his breath steady. Frank would die before he let the Adocians have the Odyssey's tech. His ship had been crippled battling their kind. A war hero renowned for guile, he couldn't let the aliens claim what was in the databanks. Not while he lived. The fate of humanity hung in the balance. All the Adocians had to do was make one wrong move. As Knox led his boarding party into the Odyssey's depths, they walked into a deadly labyrinth. In the gloom of the powered-down ship, every shadow could conceal a trap, and the Adocians advanced with caution. Zar went to access a control panel, eager to get the ship's systems online. His clawed fingers barely brushed the interface before a massive electrical surge coursed through his body. The shock flung him back from the panel, leaving him unconscious and twitching on the floor. Kaz moved to check on his fallen comrade, but his foot came down on a hidden pressure plate. There was a hiss as a cloud of noxious green gas billowed out from concealed vents. The Adocians recoiled, choking and gasping as the gas seared their lungs. They staggered back, retreating to a sealed room to escape the toxic miasma. "This ship is a death trap," Knox snarled, slamming a fist against the wall. "That human scum is still aboard. Back to the Zephyr. We need a new plan." As the Adocians retreated to their own vessel, Frank knew he had little time. The reptilians would return, with more numbers and bigger guns. In the Odyssey's armory, he found his edge, a powered exoskeleton. The machine whirred to life around him, augmenting his strength and speed to superhuman levels. Frank's next stop was the reactor core. If he couldn't have the Odyssey, neither could the Adocians. He would overload the core and reduce the ship to atoms before he let its secrets fall into enemy hands. His armored fingers danced over the control panel, initiating the meltdown sequence. Suddenly the ship rocked with a thunderous explosion, throwing Frank to the floor. The Adocians had returned in force, breaching the hull with focused charges. Alarms wailed as the reptilian strike team flooded into the Odyssey, their weapons primed. They surged through the corridors, a scaled tide determined to claim the derelict vessel and seize the human survivor. Frank gritted his teeth as he pulled himself back to his feet. The fight wasn't over yet. He still had a few tricks up his armored sleeve. The Adocians wanted the Odyssey. They would have to pry it from his cold, dead hands. The powered exoskeleton whirred and clicked as Frank moved, amplifying his strength and speed. He charged down the corridor, the heavy footfalls of his armored boots echoing off the walls. A group of Adocian soldiers rounded the corner ahead, their weapons raised. Frank dove into a side passage, narrowly avoiding a hail of plasma bolts that scorched the bulkhead where he'd been standing moments before. He primed a frag grenade and tossed it around the corner, the explosive skittering across the floor towards the Adocians. They scattered, but the blast caught two of them, shredding their armor and flesh with shrapnel. Frank leaned out and opened fire with his pulse rifle, the rapid-fire bursts cutting down the remaining aliens in sprays of blood and gore. More Adocians were coming, their clawed feet clattering on the metal deck plates. Frank fell back, luring them deeper into the ship. He ducked into a maintenance hatch, waiting as the aliens passed by his position. As they entered a narrow junction, he lobbed another grenade into their midst. The explosion tore through the confined space, the shockwave slamming the Adocians against the walls. "Pull back to the Zephyr." Knox's voice crackled over the Adocian comm channel that Frank had tapped into. "We're taking too many casualties." Frank grinned, his teeth flashing in the dim light. The reptiles were running scared. He made his way to the reactor control room, his exoskeleton enhanced speed, allowing him to outpace the retreating Adocians. His fingers flew over the console as he initiated the overload sequence. A countdown began, the numbers ticking down towards the ship's imminent destruction. Suddenly the door to the control room exploded inward, torn from its hinges by a powerful blow. Nox stood in the smoking ruins of the doorway, his eyes blazing with rage. "You will not deny us this victory, human," he snarled, his claws flexing. Frank charged forward, his exoskeleton lending him speed and power. He slammed into Nox like a freight train, driving the Adosian back. They grappled, smashing against the walls and control panels as they fought. Nox's claws raked across Frank's armor, leaving glowing gouges in the metal. Frank retaliated with a punch that cracked the Adosian's jaw, sending teeth flying. "Warning, reactor overload imminent. All personnel evacuate immediately." The ship's computer blared, its calm voice a jarring contrast to the brutal hand-to-hand combat. Frank headbutted Nox, the armored helm of his exoskeleton crashing against the Adosian's skull. Nox went limp, his eyes rolling back in his head. Frank grabbed the unconscious alien and dragged him through the corridors towards the hangar bay. The countdown ticked away in his helmet's display, the seconds slipping by with terrible speed. He reached the escape pod, the last one left on the dying ship. Frank heaved Nox's limp form into the cramped interior and clambered in after him. His armored fist slammed down on the launch button. The pod blasted free of the Odyssey, mere moments before the reactor went critical. A blinding flash of light erupted behind them as the ship exploded, the shockwave slamming into the pod and sending it tumbling through space. The escape pod slammed into the planet's surface, kicking up a cloud of dust and debris. The impact rattled Frank's bones, even through the padding of his exoskeleton. Warning lights flashed, and alarms blared inside the cramped confines of the pod. He shook his head to clear the dizziness and glanced over at Nox. The Adosian commander was still unconscious, a trickle of dark blood running from a gash on his forehead. Frank hit the release for the pod's hatch, and it hissed open, revealing a desolate alien landscape. A thick greenish haze hung in the air, and the ground was a patchwork of jagged rocks and sickly-looking vegetation. He dragged Nox out of the wreckage, the exoskeleton giving him the strength to hoist the Adosian's bulk over his shoulder. A quick scan of the surroundings revealed a series of caves in a nearby cliff face. Frank trudged towards them, his armored boots crunching on the gravel. The air was thin and acrid, burning his lungs with every breath. He could feel the toxins seeping through the seals of his exoskeleton, slowly poisoning him. Inside the caves, the air was slightly more breathable, filtered through the rock. Frank laid Nox down on a flat stretch of stone and checked his vitals. The Adosian's pulse was steady, but his breathing was shallow. Frank tended to his own wounds, sealing the cracks in his armor with a tube of emergency sealant. Hours crawled by in the dim light of the caves. Frank kept watch over Nox, his mind racing. They were stranded on a hostile world, light years from any help. The Adosian was his only chance at survival. As much as it galled him to admit it, he needed Nox's knowledge and technology to make it out of this alive. Nox stirred, his eyes flickering open. He lunged at Frank, his claws scrabbling at the human's armor. Frank caught his wrists, holding him back. "Easy, easy. We're on the same side now, like it or not." Nox snarled, his teeth bared. "I should kill you where you stand, human." "You could try," Frank said, his grip tightening. "But then you'd be alone on this rock. We need each other to survive." Nox's struggles ceased, and he slumped back against the cave wall. "What do you propose?" "A truce," Frank said. "I have the survival skills, you have the tech. We work together. We might just make it out of this alive." Nox considered for a moment, then nodded. "Very well, a truce for now." The days that followed were a struggle for survival. The planet's atmosphere was toxic, and the wildlife was vicious and unpredictable. Frank taught Nox how to find safe water sources and forage for edible plants, while the Adosian used his advanced technology to purify the air and synthesize nutritional supplements. They fell into an uneasy routine, their mutual distrust slowly giving way to a grudging respect. Frank couldn't help but admire Nox's resilience and resourcefulness, while the Adosian came to appreciate the human's tenacity and skill. But their fragile alliance was about to be tested. One day, as they were scavenging for supplies, they stumbled upon a group of natives. The creatures were primitive, with green-grey skin and bulbous eyes. They carried crude spears and bows, and they chittered and hissed at the sight of the outsiders. "Zorgons," Nox growled. "Savage beasts. We should exterminate them before they cause trouble." Frank held up a hand. "No, wait, they're intelligent. We can't just slaughter them." But the Zorgons didn't share Frank's peaceful intentions. With a screech, they charged forward, their weapons raised. Frank and Nox fought back, their advanced weaponry cutting through the primitive attackers. But the Zorgons kept coming, a tide of green-grey bodies swarming over the rocks. In the chaos of the battle, Frank saw a group of Zorgons flanking Nox, their bows drawn. Time seemed to slow as he leaped forward, his exoskeleton-enhanced muscles propelling him into the path of the arrows. They slammed into his armor, piercing the metal and burying themselves in his flesh. Frank staggered, his vision blurring. Nox was at his side in an instant, his claws tearing into the Zorgons. The aliens fell back, screeching in terror, as the Adoshan commander stood over the wounded human. "Why did you do that?" Nox demanded, his voice rough with emotion. "Why risk your life for me?" Frank coughed, tasting blood. "Because we're in this together, whether we like it or not. I need you and you need me. We have to trust each other or we're both dead." Nox's eyes widened and he nodded slowly. "I understand. From now on we fight as one." He helped Frank to his feet, supporting the human's weight as they limped back to the caves. The battle had forged a bond between them, a connection born of shared struggle and sacrifice. They knew that their survival depended on their ability to work together, to trust each other completely. As they huddled in the caves, tending to their wounds and planning their next move, Frank and Nox knew that they were no longer just a human and an Adosian. They were something more, something stronger. They were survivors, united against all odds on a hostile world, determined to fight their way back to the stars. As days turned to weeks on the hostile planet, Williams and Nox found their uneasy alliance tested by the relentless Zorgon attacks. The green-grey aliens came at them in waves, their primitive weapons no match for the advanced technology of the human and Adoshan. But what the Zorgons lacked in firepower, they made up for in sheer numbers and tenacity. Williams and Nox fought back-to-back, pulse rifle and plasma claw working in tandem, to cut down the charging horde. The air was thick with the stench of blood and ozone, the ground littered with broken bodies. "We can't keep this up forever," Williams grunted, slamming a fresh power cell into his rifle. "We need to find a way off this rock." Nox nodded, his reptilian eyes scanning the battlefield. "There has to be more to this than meets the eye. The Zorgons fight with a desperation that goes beyond mere territorial defense." As if in answer to their musings, a group of Zorgons suddenly broke away from the main force, fleeing into the jungle. Williams and Nox exchanged a glance, then took off in pursuit, leaving the sounds of battle behind them. They crashed through the dense undergrowth, following the trail of broken branches and trampled vegetation. The Zorgons were moving with purpose, as if drawn by an unseen force. Suddenly the jungle gave way to a vast clearing, and Williams and Nox skidded to a halt, their jaws dropping in awe. Before them lay the ruins of a sprawling city, its towering spires and sweeping arches, speaking to a level of technology far beyond anything they had seen from the Zorgons. "This doesn't make sense," Williams muttered, his eyes wide. "The Zorgons are supposed to be primitives, not advanced engineers." Nox stepped forward, his claws running over the weathered stone. "I don't think they are primitives, Williams. I think they chose this way of life." As they explored the ruins, the truth began to unfold. The Zorgons were not the simple savages they appeared to be, but rather the descendants of a highly advanced civilization that once ruled the planet. Inscriptions and murals told the story of a society that had reached the pinnacle of technological achievement, only to see it all come crashing down in a cataclysm of its own making. "They realized the danger of unchecked progress," Nox said, his voice hushed with reverence. "They saw the destruction their technology could wreak, and they chose to walk away from it." Williams nodded, a sense of understanding dawning. "And now they see us as a threat, a reminder of the path they abandoned." No sooner had the words left his mouth than a swarm of glittering motes descended upon them, a cloud of nanobots that swarmed over their equipment, their weapons, devouring the advanced technology with frightening speed. Williams and Knox could only watch in horror as their pulse rifles and plasma claws crumbled to dust, the nanobots stripping them down to nothing. "A failsafe," Knox growled, his eyes narrowing. "A weapon of last resort to protect their way of life." Stripped of their technological advantage, Williams and Knox were forced to flee deeper into the ruins, the Zorgons hot on their heels. They ducked and weaved through crumbling corridors, their hearts pounding in their chests. "Thessa," Williams shouted, pointing to a towering structure at the heart of the city. "That looks like a hangar bay." They sprinted towards the building, the Zorgons' war cries echoing behind them. Inside they found a long-forgotten spacecraft, its sleek lines and gleaming hull speaking to a level of technology that put even the Adosians to shame. "Can you fly this thing?" Williams asked, his eyes wide. Knox nodded, his claws already dancing over the control panel. "I can try, but we'll need time to get it operational." Williams unslung his exoskeleton, the last piece of functioning technology they had left. "I'll buy you that time." He strode out to face the Zorgons, the exoskeleton whirring and clicking as it amplified his strength and speed. The aliens came at him in a rush, their spears and arrows bouncing off his armored frame. Williams fought like a man possessed, his fists and feet smashing through the Zorgon ranks. But for everyone he felled, two more seemed to take their place. He could feel the exoskeleton beginning to fail, the nanobots eating away at its circuitry. Suddenly a plasma bolt sizzled past his ear, and he turned to see Knox charging into the fray, a salvaged Adosian weapon clutched in his claws. The Zorgons fell back, screeching in terror, as the two warriors fought side by side. But the nanobots were relentless, and soon even Knox's weapon began to falter. A Zorgon spear caught him in the side, and he stumbled, his blood staining the ground. "Go," he roared, shoving Williams towards the spacecraft. "I'll hold them off." Williams hesitated, torn between his duty and his newfound friendship. But the look in Knox's eyes brooked no argument. With a final nod, he turned and sprinted for the ship, the sounds of battle ringing in his ears. He launched himself into the cockpit, his hands flying over the unfamiliar controls. The engines roared to life, the ancient craft shuddering as it lifted off the ground. Williams could see Knox below, a lone figure surrounded by a sea of enemies. The Adosian fought with the last of his strength, buying precious seconds with each blow. And then the Zorgons overwhelmed him, and he disappeared beneath a tide of green-grey bodies. Williams bit back a cry of anguish as he pointed the nose of the ship towards the stars. He could feel the nanobots beginning to infiltrate the craft's systems, and he knew he had only moments before they consumed it entirely. With a final burst of speed, he broke free of the planet's atmosphere, leaving behind the world where he had found an unlikely friend and learned a bitter truth. As he set a course for Earth, he knew that he carried with him a warning, a message of the dangers that lurked in the unchecked pursuit of power and technology. But he also carried something else, something more precious, the memory of a bond forged in the crucible of survival, a friendship that had transcended the barriers of species and culture, and he knew that, whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with the strength and wisdom he had gained from his time on that strange and unforgiving world. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.